Hi everyone, I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Thanks for checking out Sarder TV, an idea-sharing platform founded by Russell Sarder, author, investor, and CEO of Netcom Learning. And joining us today in the studios to share some of his rather revolutionary ideas is entrepreneur and best-selling author David McCourt, here to talk about his latest book, Total Rethink: Why Entrepreneurs Should Act Like Revolutionaries. All right, so David, tell us a little bit about your background and your childhood and how it helped contribute to this intriguing and I must say rather witty, kind of part biographical, part business book. And then why now?
Well, there's a lot of questions there, Tracy, but my background, Irish Catholic family in Boston, youngest of 7, and the 2 parents and the 2 grandparents, so there was sort of 11 of us in the house at one time. So it was a great, blue collar upbringing, and my mother, who was with me for 102 years until last month, was the matriarch of the entire family and gave me the confidence to do everything I've done. And she's almost solely responsible for my success because she was just such a wonderful, wonderful human being and such an encouraging person, which I talk about in my book. In Total Rethink, I actually talk about how everybody needs a mentor, and she was sort of my first mentor. So it's because of her that I was able to be successful. And my father died before I was successful. And why now? I wrote the book, and I'm glad you found it funny, but I wrote the book because for my entire career, and even if you go back to the Industrial Revolution up through sort of the 90s, everything was about incremental change, and that's how you ran your business, and that's how you ran your life. And they had names for it, like another point of inventory and 6 Sigma, and another point of EBITDA, another turn of inventory. Everything was about incremental change. Now everything is about just blowing up the model and starting fresh because of the internet, because of social media, because of the way we absorb news. Everything's just moving too fast, and the problems are coming at us faster than we're catching up if we're going to approach them on an incremental basis. And that's across not only business, but that's across your personal life as well. So I wrote a book to sort of highlight that and suggest ways that people could take a more revolutionary, a more entrepreneurial approach to these problem sets.
So what do you hope people take away from reading your book, Total Rethink?
I hope that people will examine their lives not in the construct of what used to happen, but in the construct of a new beginning, that they can accomplish anything they want and solve the problems that they're facing, whether it's business or otherwise. And I actually hope more non-business people read the book. Because business people, Tracy, they're like mice. They'll find a crumb somewhere. There's lots of people who want to change their life that are diplomats or healthcare professionals or teachers or firewomen or policemen or policewomen that really want to rethink their life, and they're not business people. And I hope the book is read by and resonates with them as much as with business people, but everybody that wants to rethink their life.
So love the title. It's called Total Rethink, as we mentioned before, Why Entrepreneurs Should Act Like Revolutionaries. Now, how about you? Did you always have a bit of a revolutionary streak in you while growing up?
Well, I probably did. But I also collect revolutionary art, which is sort of funny. So I collect art from past revolutionaries. Not that I'm supporting, government people overthrowing a democratic government, but I just think that people who approach things in a more revolutionary, more entrepreneurial way is necessary for today's problems. I mean, these problems are coming at us very fast, and we're addressing them. Even if you take our school system, where people used to live inside institutions all the time, and people would go work for a big company, and those companies would last 40 years, and they'd leave with a gold watch and a pension. That world doesn't exist anymore. But yet we're putting people through the same educational system to prepare them for a world that doesn't even exist anymore. So that all has to change. And that system that's not designed correctly is also costing too much. So it's not designed correctly, and it's costing too much. So the average person can't afford it. My grandfather was a janitor. He cleaned toilets for a living. but yet he owned his own house. He raised his daughter, which turned out to be my mother, and he could save enough money for my daughter to go to school. He wasn't worried if his daughter, my mother, he wasn't worried if his daughter got sick. He could afford the healthcare bill. Healthcare costs now are rising faster than wages. Housing costs are rising faster than wages. Educational costs are rising faster than wages. That's unsustainable.
Okay, so you do wear many hats besides being an author, entrepreneur. You are also founder and CEO of a company called Granahan McCourt Capital. What sets this company apart from other investment firms?
Well, most investment firms are in the business of taking other people's money and they invest it for other people and they take a fee for it. We're a little different. We're operators. We see an opportunity, and I never ask anybody to invest in something that I haven't put my own money in first, and I never take my own money out first. I go in first and out
unique
last.
Unique about investment firms. Most firms do not act that way.
Well, most firms don't use their own money. Most people are using other people's money. We use the majority of the money is our money, number one, and number two, we also, when we buy or start a business, we run it ourselves as well. Most investment companies don't run the business. So we use our own money first, we run the business, and if the business is sold, we're the last ones out. So it's a little bit different, or a lot different maybe.
So in your book, you talk a lot about the 5 billion have-nots on the planet versus the 2 billion haves. And you say most people think the only way to level the playing field is through higher taxes, tax the rich. You seem to disagree with this formula. So tell us why you think that would not work, and also why is this so important now that we begin to try to correct this glaring imbalance in society?
Well, we agree there's an imbalance, right? The rich are getting richer and the bottom is falling farther behind. And we have to agree that the current system is not working. The left blames big business and says it's all big business is evil, and the right says there's too much government and government is evil, and they both are just creating this polarizing effect of blaming each other. And the truth is that it's not all business's fault and it's not all government's fault. Government is there to try to keep us safe and keep everything running on time. Business is there to create capital and employ people and expand jobs and expand the economy. They're not all bad, but the divide between the haves and the have-nots is getting bigger, and to attack the top is just more of that polarizing, let's blame somebody else because they have something that we want. So I was in London last week, and the Labour Party there, which is equivalent to our Democratic Party, and I'm an Irish Catholic that grew up as a Democrat, worked for Tip O'Neill, so I get that. So they outlined their construct, their platform for this year. And one of the things they said they wanted to do is get rid of private schools, because 20% of the schools are private, 80 are public. The private are producing good results, the public aren't. So instead of saying, why don't we take what works in this 20% and figure out how to cost effectively make it work on the other 80%, they're saying, why don't we close the 20%? It's almost like if 80% of the people can't have it, no one should have it. That doesn't work. Attacking the top doesn't work. What we need to do is take what's working and lift up the bottom. We don't need to attack the top, we need to lift up the bottom. We need to get more money to the bottom. We need to slow or eliminate the gap between the wage growth and what it costs to buy a house. People now, my grandfather as a janitor could buy a house. If two janitors are married to each other or living together, they can't afford to buy a house. The housing costs are just rising too fast. Educational costs are rising too fast.
Right.
So we need to bring up the bottom, Tracy, not attack the top. And I agree there's a big problem. I'm just saying the way to solve it is to bring up the 5 billion that have-nots, not to just attack. Yeah, it's a great soundbite to say it's the 1%er's fault. And maybe they do have too much money. But attacking, I've never seen arguing, attacking, solve a problem in my life. Usually it's solved through collaboration, it's solved through cooperation. When I worked for Tip O'Neill, my little cubicle was right outside his office, and when he'd come in every day, I'd say, how'd we do today, Mr. Speaker? And he'd say, well, Davey, we got half. And in those days, half was good.
Collaborating and working together.
There's nothing wrong with half. Half for you, half for me. That's not so bad. Now it has to be 100% my way, and the other side has to say, I want 100% my way, and nothing gets done.
You see that changing anytime soon with this administration or the next administration? It's been constant with the...
It will change. This administration, no, because, I mean, whether you or your viewers are Trump fans or not, you can't deny that he's not a weird dude, right? You can't deny me that. And
no denying that.
He's not going to solve any problem. But the problem has to get solved because, like all problems, they follow a curve, and at some point it breaks. But there's no need for it to break because meanwhile, people are starving. Meanwhile, people are getting left behind. And in my book, I outline it's not a small percentage. Just like 5 billion people that are getting left behind. And that has to be solved. We can't live in a world like that. We need to be in America, we need to be the leader to solve these problems.
Okay, you are an extremely successful entrepreneur. Tell us about the first time you acted like a revolutionary and blew up a model to create something better, and what was it that propelled you to think that way at that specific time in your life?
Probably the best example would be, I started as a contractor. I invented this method that sort of revolutionized the way you build cable systems. But anyway, I didn't get paid. So and in my book I tell the story, and it just highlights that bad judgment makes great stories, right? So I wasn't getting paid, and I was.
But you thought you were going to get paid.
Well, at one point when I laid off everybody and had no money left, I started worrying. I was in a bar with 2 friends of mine bitching about it, and one of them said, "Hey, Dave, you just got to stop bitching. Like, no one wants to hear it. Like, just go do something about it." So I got a backhoe and I started digging up the cable system that I had laid, and I called the owner and I said, "Look, if you're not going to pay me, I'm going to take my work back." So I shut the cable system down.
That was great.
It created
in your book that you thought to do that.
It created a huge, are you allowed to use the word shitstorm on TV? But it created a huge problem. And
this was up in Boston.
And I got paid within a week. And then I told my best friend, Jimmy Finnegan at the time, I said, "Look, we have to find a revenue recurring business. We need to find a business where you get the customer and then they pay you every month. This construction business where you have to fight to get the work, fight to do the work, then fight to get paid." So that's for the birds. And I built the first competitive phone company in America. But the idea came from that problem. So without Cablevision not paying me, I never would have gone into the telephone business, and I never would have built the first competitive phone company in America. So that came through a problem.
So adversity made you think and made you stronger. That's what you took away from that.
Exactly. Your answers are better than mine to these questions. You should just ask the question and do the answer.
So do you see on the horizon the revolutionary giants like a Google, Facebook, Amazon now suddenly becoming the next generation of entrenched companies to be blown up or disrupted?
Yes, it's almost impossible when you get that big to think the way you need to think to be a revolutionary. I mean, it's with a few exceptions. Steve Jobs, maybe Reed Hastings has done it. The very few exceptions are you able to get out of your own way and look back and be the one that created the new model. I mean, Facebook is hugely successful. Do you think they will be the ones? I mean, the future is where you own your own data. That's the future. That's going to happen. It's going to happen too late. The regulatory people will work too slow.
You think that's 5-10 years off the horizon, or even?
It'll be. It's like number portability. Now, most of your viewers are probably young; they don't know this. But when I first started in the phone business, I would knock on the door and say, "I have a competitive phone company. It's 30% cheaper. It's better. It's faster. It's great." And they'd be like, "Here's a pen. I'll sign you up." And they're like, "Great." And I said, "We have to change your phone number." They're like,
"Oh,
I have no interest in that." So I had to testify before Congress to get number portability. It was me and hundreds of other people that fought for that. Now you own your own phone number. Soon you will own your own data. And when we look back at that company, that is the new social media platform where all the users own their own data, people will write books Harvard professors will do case studies. And there'll be volumes of books about why didn't Facebook be the company that allowed all the users to own their own data.
You're starting to pen something like this? Is that what's going through your mind?
No, I will support someone who does that, though. I will support someone who does that because that's the right thing to do. We built the first competitive phone company. I'm so proud that when we built Somerville, Massachusetts with the first residential competitive phone company. We offered voice, video, and data. It was the first town in America, the first time ever that cable rates went down, not up. And that was because we were the first one ever to compete. And I'm very proud of that. Very proud of that.
Hence, you ended up selling that? Was that your first successful venture where you came up with a company and idea and then sold it?
I guess my first was Corporate Communications Network, which I merged into MFS. We created MFS McCourt, and then we sold the whole company for $14.5 billion to a company called WorldCom. And then I was on the board of MCI WorldCom for a number of years, and then I bought a put and sold a call and collared my stock.
Beforehand, before it all imploded.
Before it all imploded, yeah. I'm like in those cartoons, you know, where you're walking on the street and the safe falls down out of the window and it lands behind you. I was like, whoa,
I just made it.
What was that? Yeah, so I collared my stock, luckily. So I could never lose more than 20%, and I could never make more than 180%. So it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal as this exotic financial transaction. It wasn't very exotic. I mean, in retrospect, it was smart that I did it, but it was not that complicated. It sounded complicated, but it wasn't.
Tell us your thoughts a little bit on the tax system and how we can encourage entrepreneurial thinking and at the same time trying to help lift the bottom 5 billion. Do you have any ideas turning around in your head?
When I say in my book that I don't think increase in taxes is the solution, it isn't because I'm supporting rich people making more money. I'm just not supporting the government taking more money and wasting it. And let me just give you a glaring example. So a glaring example is that I have never met anyone that doesn't support the fact that if someone volunteers for the armed forces, part of the deal we make with men and women that do that is you get free health care in the Veterans Administration, right? The VA hospitals. Right. But what that's turned into is free bad health care, which wasn't the deal. So why do we need this whole separate system that costs billions of dollars to run that's not effective and not efficient? Why aren't we giving them a card that lets them do just what I do, which is I walk into a hospital, if I chop my finger off, I go into the hospital and I show them my insurance card and the bill gets paid and I pay my deductible or whatever. But why can't we just give them a card? Why are we building this whole infrastructure? Well, we do that because that's jobs and that's patronage and it's an infrastructure that no one wants to deal with. How do you undo it? Because it's hard and it's messy. Well, that's what these politicians are supposed to be able to deal with, is real adult problems. So we have almost as many post offices as we had, you know, when I was growing up. Like, when's the last time you mailed a letter? Like we don't move with the times at the government. We just keep on taking in more money and spending it. So I'm not saying we don't have problems. I'm saying we do have problems. I'm just saying giving the government more money to waste might not be the solution. And for instance, here's two examples. We had $1 trillion overseas, and I wrote a letter to President Trump suggesting this, but it didn't happen. We had the $1 trillion overseas, remember, because if it was over there, it wasn't being taxed, and you brought it here, it should be taxed. So I said to President Trump, I said, why don't you outline 3 or 4 really important infrastructure projects this country needs? Like one thing, light rail out to the suburbs, so that everybody's moving to an urban environment, and it's becoming unaffordable. So people are fighting traffic to get to where they can work. In rural America, is falling apart. It's not sustainable. What about fast infrastructure out there, as an example? What about high-speed internet out to these rural areas? What about creating job centers out in those rural areas? I said, come up with some internet infrastructure projects and tell these big corporations they can bring their $1 trillion back to America tax-free, as long as it's invested in American infrastructure. That didn't go anywhere. So there are lots of, what about giving entrepreneurs a tax break, significant tax break, if when they sell their company, they agree to take the winnings and do another startup. Not take the winnings and buy a third house, invest in another startup. There are a lot of countries that have an entrepreneur tax, which is 10%, as long as you invest it back in another business. So there are ways to get people, encourage people to invest, and we should be using the tax code, weaponizing it to help people create jobs.
So tell us about one of your wealth creating companies that you're most proud of over the years.
I don't look at them as whether they created wealth or not. It's what I'm most proud of. I'm probably most proud, if not Corporate Communications Network, then it would probably be my TV station in Grenada. We built a TV station in the island nation of Grenada, and we were the only TV station there, Tracy, and we couldn't afford to buy a program, so we started producing it ourselves, and we got good at it. So we would take the tapes and we'd go to the airport, and we'd go to the airport with a $5 bill, and we'd say to somebody, hey, are you going to, you're getting on the flight to Jamaica, will you take this cassette tape?
Yeah, dating yourself. What was this, the 80s, 90s?
80s,
cassette
80s,
tapes, yeah.
And we'd say to someone, when you get off the plane, there'll be someone there, and they'll give you another $5, and you give them the tape. So we'd bicycle the tapes
And
up
it worked?
it worked great. And then we started producing content in the States, and we started winning Emmys. We won a dozen Emmys by producing content in the States because we got good at it. And that I'm probably most proud of. We were good at producing content, and I'd like to get back into that business, actually.
Now, did that venture sustain itself since you did end up training all of these local people? Did it perpetuate?
That's a great question, Tracy. So when I built that TV station, we had 35 employees at one point, 0 were local. When I sold it, we had 35 employees, 100% were local. We took Grenadians and we sent them over to Central Missouri State in Central Missouri, and we sent them for a semester of school of how to write, how to produce, how to edit, you know, how to color correct, how to do everything around producing good TV. And then we'd send them back, and then we'd let Central Missouri State send college kids as a internship to our TV station. And I started on the East Coast, knocking on the door of Boston University, and I made my way all the way across the country, going to every university I could find with a TV program, you know, knocking on the door saying, I'd like to do this internship program with you. And I found my way all the way to Central Missouri State, the only time I'd ever been there.
All the others closed the door on you?
Yeah, they were all like, sound too complicated. And I said, like, send me your students, we'll put them up, and we'll send you our Grenadians, and you educate them, and we'll do a swap. And it was great. The kids loved it. And keep in mind, when they showed up in Grenada, I put them in the old Cuban embassy. So they were all in bunk rooms. You couldn't, you know, I don't know if you could do this now. They were males, females, like everybody was in bunks. And there was, the only bathroom was the one in the station. You know, so there was a lot of guys out peeing behind the trees. You know, I mean, there wasn't a lot of, it wasn't fancy. And they'd walk down the bottom of the hill to the beach, and that's where they'd bathe in the morning. They'd jump in the ocean. And they loved it. They loved it. It was fabulous. It was TV like Edward R. Murrow wanted it to be.
So tell us about how did you end up interning for House Speaker Tip O'Neill while you were in college, who was then working with President Ronald Reagan, and what specifically did you take out of that experience? What did you learn from interning at the White House?
I got the job because I wanted to be a cop, and I had applied to be a cop, and they told me I had the job, and then they pulled the job offer because they had this set-aside rule where they had already had surprise. They had too many white Irish kids from Boston, right?
So, what else is there back then in Boston?
Exactly. So too many white Irish kids in South Boston. It's like, no kidding. So they pulled the job offer. So I was complaining, and my father was like, hey, you gotta stop bitching. Like, I don't wanna hear it. Go talk to your congressman. So I marched down to Watertown Square, where there was a little tiny congressional office, and I walked in. There was a guy named John Carver there. I remember it well. And I went in and I started complaining. And while I was complaining, he took out a piece of paper and he was writing a note. And I thought he was just taking notes of the meeting, and he folded it up. And he said, do you really want to be a cop? And I said, yeah. And he said, why don't you go to college? And because he had asked me earlier where I got accepted. I said Georgetown and St. Anselm's, and one I had a hockey scholarship to, and one I didn't. And he said, why don't you just go to Georgetown, get an education. If you still want to be a cop, come see me when you get out. And he said, when you get to Washington, go to Tip O'Neill's office and hand this envelope to a woman named Dolores Snow. So I got to Georgetown, I went to Tip O'Neill's office. I handed her the envelope. She opened it, and she said, "When do you want to start?"
That's amazing.
And that's what I said.
You're like,
that's amazing.
You seem to be your whole life in the right place at the right time.
I am so lucky. Tracy, you have no idea how blessed I've been. I am so blessed. I am so blessed.
I can't imagine that happening today. I don't. It just sounds so.
Just if you have a positive attitude, and you're always looking forward, and you don't spend a lot of time bitching and whining.
Like your parents taught you not to do, among others.
When there's 11 of you hanging around the house and you're the youngest, there's not a lot of time for bitching. But that produces an attitude that allows you to find luck. And if you listen, it's out there if you listen.
So what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs who have like zero track record of success and they need funding? And also, can you share a personal success story early on in your career of a venture being successful?
Well, the advice I would give them is not to give up, because you're saying they don't have a success yet. They also might not have a failure yet. You need to build up as many failures as you do successes early on. And I don't outline all my failures in the book because, I didn't want it to be 2,000 pages long. Then you wouldn't read it. But the failures.
Whoops! Now put that back.
The failures are as many as the successes. But you're human. The brain doesn't necessarily remember all the things you screwed up. You sort of remember your successful things. You don't necessarily remember all your failures. But look, they gotta jump in and do it when you're young. What's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? You fail, you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start again. And, Tracy, your plan B will, by definition, be better than your plan A. Because your plan B has all the information your plan A had, plus what not to do. So every time, and your plan C is going to be better than your plan B because it has everything you had in your plan A and your plan B, plus 2 things now not to do. And eventually, by the time you get to LMNOP, you know what not to do, and you get it right.
So your A through LMNOP were not in your book, and then after that, you incorporated all the successes.
But it still happens. It still happens today.
It still, it goes round and round.
We're still making mistakes every day. We're making mistakes.
But that's how you learn.
Every day.
That's how you get better.
And that's how you enjoy life, and you live an interesting, extraordinary life. Who would want to live a normal existence if you don't have to? Why would you choose to do that?
So why do you think so many companies and those that are in power in this day and age use short-term thinking?
Because they're lazy, number one. And in the case of politicians, because they want to get reelected. So they want to offer up. Let's take an example. So education is rising way faster than wages. So it's like you're running after a bus, you're late for work, you're running as fast as you can, and you can see the bus picking up speed. It cuts your heart out. America is a country of hopes and dreams, and it cuts your heart out and takes away your dignity if you can't afford a house, you can't afford education for your kids, and you can't afford health care. And if those things keep on getting away from you faster than you can work, faster than you can make money, no matter what you do, no matter how many hours you work, you lose your dignity. And America's not about Wall Street, it's not about Silicon Valley, it's the country of hopes and dreams. And that dignity and that hopes and dreams will go away if those things that give you dignity, like owning your own house, like my grandfather, the janitor, did, they go away. So people have to solve those problems long term. So we hear a lot now in this presidential debates, there's another one on TV tonight, that we should get rid of student loan. The problem with that is it's at 1.1 trillion. It's more debt than any other consumer debt other than mortgages, more than all the credit card debt in America. It adds $1 trillion to our deficit and doesn't solve the problem. So if I have a 7th grader at home and a 9th grader at home, I'm going to be like, wait a minute, you just added $1 trillion to my deficit and you still haven't helped me with my 2 kids. You've only helped me, if I had a 25-year-old that's already out of school, you've helped me a little bit because he or she doesn't have college debt, but you haven't solved the problem. Solve the problem. Use technology to lower the cost of education. That's the problem. And people don't want to take on long-term problems because they're lazy and they're hard and they're messy. So we got to find leadership that's willing to solve hard, messy problems.
Now, what's your advice to small revolutionary companies and thinkers that are out there trying to blow up updated business models?
Like, more power to them. I love it. I love it. Like, how do we help them more? We should have everything in the American tax system and everything in the American political system should support those small businesses. Everything should support them because we're going to need them. I mean, look, Internet 3.0, Tracy, it's coming right around the corner, is going to blow your mind. If you think there's a lot of change now, wait till you see what's going to happen over the next 10 or 15 years. Internet 1.0 was just ones and zeros being moved more efficiently. Internet 2.0 was just us communicating with a machine, and that gave us what? Google, FaceTime, Instagram, whatever else you have on your phone. Internet 3.0 is machines communicating with machines in real time at scale.
This is all AI and AR.
It's going to blow your mind.
Yeah.
It's going to blow your mind how everything's going to change. We need all those young people. We need them. And we need all the immigrants that with all the smart ideas that want to work their ass off. We got everything backwards.
Now, is there an alternative these young people should be exploring besides college? I mean, everyone talks about the coding and you have to be technology driven. Is there something that should be incorporated into education to get ready for this Internet 3.0?
We know that if there's an educational institution is training you the old way.
So it's more like trade schools almost that are needed to do this type of technology.
Teach people how to think. The 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and rethink. That's what we need. The 4 R's: reading,
You're gonna
writing,
change the title of your book now.
arithmetic, and rethink. That's what you need. We need to train people how to rethink their lives. And hopefully my book will do a little tiny bit of that. I hope.
How important are mentors, do you think, to these young revolutionary thinkers that are out there today?
Critical. Mentors are critical. This is one of the problems that people who say, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I speak at high schools and colleges, and when I speak to high school kids, I say, what do you think being an entrepreneur means? They say, well, they make their own hours, they don't have a boss, they're going to make a lot of money. Well, in reality,
they work 24
you're
hours.
going to work 24 hours a day so that you don't have to work 8 hours a day for someone else, okay? You're going to make less money most of the time, and you're going to have lots of bosses, whether that's the customers that come in your shop, whatever it is. You're going to have lots of bosses. Find one that can be your mentor. Find someone and I've had a lot, including my mother, but in my book I talk about that cold call letter I wrote to Jack Welch. He was so kind to me. Came into his office. He was so good to me. Walter Scott from Omaha, Nebraska. He's 88 now. Took me under his wing. So I've had a lot of people help me. A lot of people help me. And I spent a lot of time thanking them.
Now, did you find these mentors? You went to them or they came to you? And if so, is there one in particular that kind of stands out and helped you shape your thinking and career as an entrepreneur?
Well, for anybody listening to this, don't count on anybody finding you. You got to go out there and grab it.
Okay.
Like, you got to go out there and find your mentor. You got to go out there and find people that will help you. And people don't like to say no, and people like to help people. I mean, you can't ask someone for, their whole life. You got to ask someone for a bite-sized piece. You got to make it worthwhile. But yeah, I'd say Walter Scott, the chairman emeritus of Kiewit Construction from Omaha, Nebraska, was probably my number one mentor that brought me under his wing and taught me the most, and still does. I still learn from him.
Now, is there a difference from being just an entrepreneur versus a creative entrepreneur that you talk about in your book? And are there actually downsides to being too creative? And share an example, if you would.
Well, yeah, being too creative, there is a downside because sometimes you just want something to look and feel a certain way, and it's just either not possible or not practical, or it just won't make money that way. And sometimes you're so creative that you've got something 80% of the way done and you have another idea and you jump off to another idea. You get that 80% of the way done, and then you jump off to another idea, get that 90% of the way done, you jump off to another idea. If you just stayed the course, you would have got over the finish line. So if you're going to be super creative, you better partner up with someone who's super disciplined, and then you'll be all right.
So you need the yin and the yang in there too.
I mean, that's what partnerships are all about, right?
Yeah.
That's why I love partnerships.
All right, so of all your myriad business and ideas and ventures over the years, which one are you most proud of and why?
Probably comes back to that TV station in Grenada, because we brought something to an island that they had no TV at all. And we brought them TV, and we produced local shows, and we explained, we produced a kids show they didn't have. We produced a cooking show, 30 years ago, before there were cooking shows. We produced a political show. We had all the political parties on. I remember the Prime Minister calling me up one time and saying, "What? I like this show you have on Sundays, but I like being on, but why do we have to have all these other people on?" I'm like, well, that's the way it works. Yeah. You have to.
Fair and balanced news.
He was sort of like, well, why don't we just have me? Prime Minister Blaise, we have to have everyone. So that was pretty good. And the first competitive phone company in America was great. RCN, another company we started, which brought competition to residential homes, in cable and internet. Yeah, I'm proud of all of them. I'm proud of the people. I'm proud of all the people that I get Christmas cards from people. I got a note from Mark Havocate the other day, a guy that used to work for me, that then went on to run his own company and grow his own company and sell it. He's now doing missionary work somewhere, but he sent me a little note and said, "I wouldn't have been able to do that if it wasn't for the training that you gave me." So there's a lot of people. Blair Turner, who worked with me for, I don't know, it seems like 1,000 years, 20 years. She's now a coach, an executive coach, and she was my PA. And through what she learned working with me, she's able to then take that on the road and help other executives. So a lot of people have started their own businesses or gone on to be CEOs of businesses that used to work with me. And I'm probably more proud of the people than the product.
So of every new adventure, did they all come with their own set of challenges, or did you start to see patterns within these ventures that it happened with this, it's going to happen with this company, and that they had similar issues?
Well, both. They all come with their own problems, but you do start to see patterns over time, and that's what makes, I think, a good businessman or woman is someone that can see, I call it, you see the pattern, and then you see the common red thread that sort of weaves its way through those. And both in opportunities and in problems, you see that same thing. You see a pattern over time, and then you can start to put the pieces together. If you sit quietly, you can put the pieces together, and then you can see where you sort of close your eyes and you can see how it's going to play itself out. And I like to say that you have to put yourself in the future and then look back, because it's easier to see what the next move is going to be if you put yourself in the finished product and then turn around and look back.
So how important is it for entrepreneurs to be able to see trends, and is this a gift or something that you kind of learn by trial and error? And how did it work for you?
I think some people are just better at it, born better at it than others. I think everyone is born with a certain skill set, and the system is wrong, because the system, from when you're a little kid going through the educational system, they always encourage you to work on your weaknesses. And there's all sorts of empirical data that tells you that that's the wrong approach. You should encourage people to work on their strengths, because you can improve your strengths almost infinitely, and you can improve your weaknesses marginally. So why work on your weaknesses, which you can only improve marginally, when you can improve your strengths infinitely? And other than sports, when you're a little kid, they always tell you to work on your weaknesses. And I don't mean if you have something you're doing wrong, not to try to fix it, but in general, go to what you're good at. And now we're like giving kids, everybody Ritalin, trying to get them to Concerta or whatever it's called, getting everybody to think the same way, getting everybody to fit into a little box. It's a ridiculous system.
Tell us about one of the biggest busts in your career, if you do have a big bust in your career, which you alluded to, and what lessons did you take away from it?
We bought the satellite company, and it wasn't working. So some of the shareholders were like, "Well, I want to get out. It's not working." And I was, I'll double down. I've just convinced myself that I could solve the problem. I convinced myself that I could solve the problem out of arrogance, and kept on doubling down and kept on losing money. And I felt like that golfer in Tin Cup. I just kept on doubling down and kept on saying, I can solve it, I can solve it. And I'd convinced myself I could. A decade later, I had lost a big piece of my life that I'll never get back. I lost a huge amount of capital that I'll never get back because I kept on saying, I can fix it, I can fix it, I can fix it. And I should have just thrown the towel in. So sometimes persistence, which is my best quality, is also my worst quality.
And weren't you surrounded by people, though, that can kind of talk you through this and make you see, like you're doing tunnel vision? Did you have the right people surrounding you at that point in time when you were starting out?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not their fault, it's my fault. I'm sure that there were plenty of people that were telling me that it was a bad idea, and I'm sure I wasn't willing at that time to absorb that information and act on it. I was too determined. I'm a determined guy, which is a good quality, but it's not necessarily good when you should say, okay, let's lick our wounds and go back to our strengths. Because on the one hand, I'm saying you should focus on your strengths, and then I'm in a situation where I'm working around. If I looked at that and said, are my strengths actually going to solve that problem? And are the strengths of the business good enough that we can expand them infinitely? The answer to those questions was no, no, no.
So what top 3 things or ideas do revolutionary entrepreneurs need to have in their arsenal in order to be successful in this day and age?
Not being afraid to fail. Finding a mentor. No matter how old you are, finding someone that you can bounce ideas off of. And be willing to take a risk. I mean, if you really think it's a good idea, don't just go out and try to talk someone into giving you money. Be willing to put your own money into it. And your own money can be whatever it is you have. But when you say to someone, I'd like you to invest in this business, and I'm putting my money in it first, and my money is the first money that's going to get lost, that gets people's attention. But they've got to be willing to fail. I think people are a little bit more, from my observation, each generation gets a little bit more spoiled than the generation before them, and they're a little bit more risk adverse, maybe. I hope not, but I think so.
You've been described as a transformational force in the technology, media, and telecommunications industries. Very lofty description. So what's next on your to-do list to blow up?
I'd like to take a look at, I used to produce a lot of TV content, Reading Rainbow and Miracles Boys, and we did a show on Showtime, and I did a documentary. I brought Angelina Jolie to Africa. We did a documentary on refugees in Tanzania. I did one with Michael Douglas on children soldiers in Sierra Leone. I did one on AIDS with Danny Glover. I did one on lack of girls' education in India with Sonia Braga. So I've done a lot of documentaries. I've done a lot of TV on Showtime and Nickelodeon. I'd like to go take a look again at producing really compelling TV content around business problems, not shows, you're fired, you suck, get out of here. Not that, the opposite of that, more like supporting business people in interesting parts of interesting places in the world, interesting stories. I'd like to rethink that. In fact, I am going to do that.
Yeah, some more positive, uplifting.
But it has to be a beautiful story. Mm-hmm. It has to be beautifully told, shot beautifully, beautiful parts of the world. It has to be interesting, because no one's going to care about an uplifting story. Unfortunately, everybody's busy, and they're just not going to be interested in it unless it's told in a very unique and beautiful way. Otherwise, it's, yawn. Everybody has their own problems to worry about, and they don't want to. People are accustomed to, watching car crashes, and so you got to change their mindset. So it has to be beautifully told, beautifully edited. It has to have fabulous music, and I'd like to figure out how to integrate up-and-coming musical artists in with the show as well.
And finally, what do you hope your legacy will be?
That I was a good dad.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, David McCourt, it has been great and fascinating and witty talking to you today, and best of luck with your new book.
Thank you very much.
And that does it for this edition of Sarder TV. We hope you enjoyed and learned something new today. Until next time, I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Thanks for watching.